All right. Good morning, everyone. If you could all take your seats. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Hobson, and I have the sincere honor of being the executive director here at the Yakima Valley Museum. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning for this exciting and unique program. This is the first in a series of museum programs to advance the legacy of William O. Douglas and his impact on legal, environmental, and policy issues important both locally and nationally. Today's program will be looking at a topic that impacts us all, and I'm grateful that the museum can be a place where programs like this can happen, and we can learn from each other and our collective past to prepare for our future. I look forward to learning alongside all of you today and hope you will enjoy today's program. I want to thank our sponsors for today's program who have generously contributed so that we can make today happen. First, the James M. and Kathleen D. Stone Foundation, whose support for the museum makes it possible for us to continue advancing the legacy of William O. Douglas. Stokes Lawrence, Villacaña Moore and Shore, the Department of Ecology, Office of Columbia River, Picotti Brothers, Inc., and the Yakima Nation, and the Bureau of Reclamation. Thank you all for helping make this program happen. Let's give a round of applause to our sponsors. I also want to thank our esteemed panelists. It's been a privilege to learn from all of you the past months, and thank you all for giving of your time and expertise to share with us today. And thank you to the Yakima Valley Museum William O. Douglas Environmental Committee, made up of staff, Board of Trustee members, community members, and chaired by Yakima Valley Museum Board member Nancy Kanmatsu. I also want to take a moment to thank our Yakima Valley Museum members. Are there any in the audience today? All right, thank you. Your membership makes it possible for us to offer engaging and innovative programming like this for everyone in our community. If you aren't a member, please consider joining us. You can find out more information at the front desk. We'd also love if you would take a survey about today's program. We value this feedback and would love to know what other programs you'd like to see in the future. With that, I want to introduce Junior Cuevas, attorney with Stokes Lawrence, Villacaña Moore and Shore, who will be our moderator for today. Thank you all again for coming.
All right. Let's start with an easy one. It is early. You probably had your first or second cup of coffee. So there are 3 sets of bathrooms that you can use. One that way, one down that way, and one on the first floor. So first of all, thank you for being here. Just you being here demonstrates your interest and commitment to water resources here in our basin, and I'm excited to see so many of you turn out. So I'm honored to be here today moderating a conversation that isn't just about policy. It's about our future. It's about the decisions we make right now that will shape the sustainability of water, our economy, and the community we call home. Water is the backbone of the Yakima Basin. It fuels a $4.5 billion agricultural industry, supports salmon and steelhead runs, sustains our tribal and municipal water needs, and provides life to an entire ecosystem. But as we all know, water is not limitless, especially in the face of increasing droughts, competing demands, and warmer winters threatening aquifers and snowpack. That's where the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan comes in. This is one of the most ambitious and collaborative water management efforts in the country. It's about ensuring that farmers, fish, and families can all rely on a sustainable water future. And today, we have the privilege of hearing directly from the people who have helped make this plan a reality and who continue to push it forward. What makes the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan remarkable is how it came together. For decades, water disputes in the Yakima Basin weren't solved around roundtables like this. They were fought in court. Farmers, the Yakima Nation, conservationists, and government agencies were locked in battles over treaty rights, water rights, allocations, and access. The future looked very uncertain then, and the conflicts seemed unending. But something has changed. Instead of fighting over water, stakeholders have made a choice to work together to find a shared solution. That shift in mindset away from a winner-takes-all and toward compromise and shared benefits has led to the birth of this Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. It's a model where no one really gets everything they want, and we want to talk about that today, but everybody gets something they need. And this isn't just a local success story. The Yakima Basin Integrated Plan is being looked at across the country and even internationally as a blueprint for managing water in the face of growing scarcity. Water conflicts are not unique to Washington State, from the Colorado River to Australia's Murray-Darling Basin. Regions worldwide are grappling with how to balance water for people, industry, and the environment. The Yakima Plan proves that when sovereigns, right holders, and stakeholders, such as tribes, farmers, conservationists, and government agencies come together, real solutions are possible. So why should this conversation matter to you? Because water connects us all, whether you're a farmer, a fisherman, a business owner, or just someone who turns on the tap every day. These decisions impact you. This panel is about more than just reviewing policies. It's about understanding the progress we've made and the work still ahead. Nothing about this is perfect, and nobody up here is claiming to have the solution that is perfect and that everybody finds is going to be happy with. But with that said, it is about inviting each of you to be a part of a conversation about what comes next, to be a part of these tough conversations, and to wrestle with what this plan looks like moving forward. Because in the end, water is life. With that, let's dive into today's discussion, and I'm excited to introduce our panelists. Please hold your applause till the end, as these are very impressive individuals that I'm excited to introduce. So first off, Wendy Christensen from the Bureau of Reclamation. She's a civil engineer and manager of the Yakima River Basin Water Enhancement Project Office for the Bureau of Reclamation. With 34 years of experience, she has led large-scale water infrastructure, planning, and construction projects, including the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, a nationally recognized model for water resource management and ecosystem restoration. Wendy's leadership in fostering collaboration among tribal, governmental, and environmental stakeholders has been instrumental in the plan's success. She has been honored with the 2024 Meritorious Service Award from the U.S. Department of Interior and previously named Engineer of the Year in 2016. She holds degrees from Colorado State University and Washington State University. Go Cougs. In the end, we want to give a extra applause for Melissa Downs, as she is hanging out with us while celebrating a birthday weekend. Melissa serves, as a financial and project section manager for the Washington State Department of Ecology's Office of Columbia River. In this role, she oversees a technical project management team who assists with water supply project development for not only the Yakima River Basin, but the greater Columbia River Basin, including the technical, environmental, funding, and policy evaluations for a variety of water supply projects such as water conservation, ecosystem function improvements, new surface water and groundwater storage, and in-stream flow enhancements. A member of the panel that is missing today is Peter Dykstra, a longtime counsel of public and private clients on water rights. And although we miss Peter's perspective, he has deputized all of us to carry his laboring oar. I would like to introduce next Urban Eberhardt, the director of the Kittitas Irrigation District. Urban Eberhardt is a dedicated leader in agricultural water management and a drought resiliency expert. Raised on a family farm in the Kittitas Valley, he has been a lifelong advocate for sustainable water solutions in the Yakima River Basin. Urban has served in leadership roles within the Agricultural Committee community, including as president of the Kittitas County Farm Bureau and longtime board member of the Kittitas Reclamation District. Since 2015, he has served as the secretary manager overseeing irrigation operations for over 60,000 acres of farmland. And for over 4 decades, Urban has been at the forefront of water policy, playing a key role in shaping the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, a nationally recognized collaboration that balances these water needs. Next, I want to introduce, bringing the farmer perspective to the panel, Sean Gilbert. Sean Gilbert is the president of Gilbert Orchards, which is a grower-shipper of apples, pears, and cherries based in Yakima. Sean grew up in Wapato and Yakima and attended Pomona College, where he got a degree in history. He oversees about 4,000 acres of tree fruit production and packs for about 50 independent apple growers, primarily in the Yakima River Basin. He has served as chairman of the Washington State Tree Fruit Association and the Northwest Horticultural Council. Sean and his wife, Anna, are raising 3 children on an apple orchard west of Wiley City. Next, Amanda McKinney, a Yakima County Commissioner. Amanda serves as the Yakima County Commissioner, and she works hard to preserve and protect farms and rural American values in the heart of Washington State and beyond. In 2020, Amanda became just the 2nd woman elected as Commissioner. She currently holds leadership roles with the Washington State Association of Counties Board of Directors and Legislative Steering Committee. Amanda sits on the National Association of Counties for Western Interstate Region Board of Directors and the Rural and Agricultural Affairs Committee, co-chairs the Rural Action Caucus, and is vice chair of the Agriculture, Food, and Safety Committee. Amanda was recently elected to represent all counties nationally on the Federal Wildland Fire Leadership Council, a presidential cabinet secretary lead council. Amanda holds dual degrees in pre-law and political science from Central Washington University, and prior to becoming commissioner, Amanda had a successful professional career spanning over 20 years in real estate finance. Amanda is blessed to call her husband, David, her best friend, and is proud mother to their 2 amazing children, Caitlin and Duke. She has a deep love and appreciation for agricultural roots of our American West and a strong sense for conservation and preservation of our natural lands in ways that provide a unified and balanced approach in managing resources for farms, families, and fish. I next want to introduce Phil Rigdon, Director of the Yakima Nation Natural Resources. Phil Rigdon is an enrolled member of the Yakima Nation and grew up on the Yakima Reservation. Phil has been the superintendent of Yakima Nation's Natural Resources Department since May 2005 and has worked for the tribe since June 1989. He represents the Yakima Nation on the Intertribal Timber Council, Yakima Basin Integrated Plan Executive Committee, the Washington State's Columbia River Policy Advisory Group, Tapash Sustainable Forest Collaborative, the University of Washington Ecolab, and the Hanford Natural Resource Trustee Council. Phil currently is Vice President of the Intertribal Timber Council and previously served as President. Phil is also a Yale School of Environment Alumni Board. Phil obtained a bachelor's in forest management from the University of Washington in 1996, Go Dogs, and a master's of forestry from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies in 2002. Our next panelist and opening remarks speaker is somebody who I hold dear to my heart. He is an elder of the Yakima Nation and also the elder who bestowed upon me my Indian name. Davis Washines Yellowwash, member of the Yakima Nation, retired from law enforcement in 2014 after 30-plus years of service, including 3 terms as Chief of Police for the Yakima Nation and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. He has served on the Executive Board of the Yakima Tribal Council and on Yakima General Council as Executive Chairman. As a youth educator, he directed the Yakima Nation Youth Summer Camp for several years, was a paraprofessional and middle school guidance counselor for the Wapato School District, as well as a Yakima language instructor at the high school. He is on the Board of Trustees for the Pacific Northwest University of Health Sciences and on the Native American Advisory Board as Vice Chairman for the Burke Museum at the University of Washington. Yellowwash is called upon in tribal communities of the region to conduct traditional ceremonies because of his knowledge of his native language, culture, and oral traditional history of native people, land, and natural resources. He also carries the Oglala Lakota name, a yellow wash day. One day he'll tell you the story of how that name was bestowed by a Lakota elder at Crazy Horse School, Pine Ridge, South Dakota in 1995 at a traditional gathering. Without further ado, I want to invite Elder Yellowwash to give us our opening remarks before we proceed with our questions. Thank you.
You ever watch Mr. Rogers? Hey. In our way, it's nothing new when people gather to discuss very important things. And nothing, as you heard from JR, and what we've always known, is that what you see on this table, along with our panel, water, is the life of everything. And so when we gather to discuss these important things, we must, from time to time, humble ourselves to the maker of all things, the creator of all things, to ask for continued guidance that this gathering here and will move in the right direction, that what these individuals are going to share with you is something that is important in many aspects to many different people of our communities. And so in our way, we have to offer a few words to the Creator. And these prayers are carried by this bird that flies the highest, because we want to be the Creator to acknowledge the efforts. And like you heard from the introductions, we have children, grandchildren, that the elders say, we don't own this land, we don't own anything, it belongs to them. And we have to take care of it the best way we can. So that's why this museum decided that this would be something important for our community, for our region, and especially for the water, the way that we manage it. And so I just want to give that a little brief explanation. And I'm going to say a prayer to clear the air here. Open your minds, open your hearts to what is going to be said, so that we can have a good meeting. There's a song that interprets this water. When we have the meal later on, I'm going to bring out that sacred song, because before every meal, we're taught we must take a sip of water in recognition of what it does for you and I. So, but this time I'm just going to say a few words in our language with a blessing for today, that things will go in a good way. Chnatque Kwayan Kuchnanit, and a Kush Quathanawas China, Squina, and Kuklach, Demiwai, and Krishna Piana, Echenyaw, and a Kush Pasidwita Chush Knick, and a Kuwetwi Chush, and a Kushi Naknuish, a Klach Tun, Chna Di Chamna, in a Knuishana Kakyama, Kwarat Tun, Chnet Tamanit, Tautnuk Klach Tun, and a kuchima and a kush pakut kun khana and a kushna sha kotanawa sha Dimiwai Yanawit, Ichinyao, and a Kunich Drach Iwinita, Ichinyao Sinuit, and a Ku Eche Poamps Mianash, and a Ku Eche and a Kushta Atwanata, China Kutkutna, Nashkuna, and a Kushna Sachach Namib, Huitamna, and a Kushna Knauta, China Quina. This day, this morning, we're grateful to see everyone here. And in whatever way we believe, that we also have to ask for encouragement from the maker of all things, that when we discuss things that are important to our community, to our family, and especially to the future, our children, our grandchildren, that we be willing to share with one another, that we be willing to work together, as you're going to hear today, with this word collaboration. And so today, I make an appeal to the Creator that things will move in the good direction, that we'll have a good day to share, and later on, a meal that will be prepared for you and I. But most important is the concern that we have been given this responsibility to take care of what we've been blessed with. And water is one of those things that we have a responsibility to. So in that manner, I just want to offer this few words. And the Kwalanas Kasinwi, and the Kushachops Nami, Tamnak, Ichinyar Guya, Go Cloud Kukush Nai. So, thank you.
Thank you, Yellow Wash. So now let's dive in. We know who our panel is, and I appreciate the introduction to kick us off. For many of you, you might know a little bit, but what is the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan? So let's start with that. Why are we here? What is this plan on a high level without really diving into specifically what it means for your individual stakeholder interests? So at a high level, what is the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan? And we'll start with Urban and move to Wendy.
Thank you, JR. The Yakima Basin Integrated Plan has been put together so that if we took ourselves out about 200 years and were able to look back, we could see and will be able to see a strong and healthy ecosystem and a strong economy, and we'll all be doing it together.
Thanks. So for me, the integrated plan is about a holistic approach to managing water in the Yakima Basin with respect to the entire watershed and how we look at not just out-of-stream uses, but in-stream uses, and collaboration with all of the different entities that manage water resources or manage a resource that's affected by drought. So,
Amanda?
From a municipal perspective, there is a great deal of concern for our stakeholders, which are community members, that they know that there are people making decisions that are going to manage well this incredible resource that matters so much. Our economy is directly tied to the ability for our farmers to have enough water to irrigate. Our tourism and our recreation, our ability of our youth to be able to experience the environment is critically important, and the only way that happens is if we create those safe opportunities for them to have interaction. We're also concerned about the ability for people to turn on the tap and make sure that water comes out. And that is critical, and municipals are charged with making sure there is an adequate water source. And so a lot of our cities across the county use deep wells. And when we talk about declining aquifers, that's something that we have to be at the table to plan for. So it really is, how are we able to manage all aspects that water touches the everyday life of a citizen who lives in Yakima County?
Thank you. And Sean, from the farmer's perspective,
Yeah, I think the plan represents the recognition as a group that how precious the water resource is to our region. We have beautiful volcanic soils. We have alluvial soils. We have this amazing climate that has this rain shadow effect from the Cascades, and to live in it, we have to have water. We wouldn't exist here otherwise, other than on a very, very small scale. And so recognizing that to have agriculture, to have fish, to have opportunities here to live, we have to get along, and we have to come up with win-win solutions, and that's what it represents for us.
Thank you, Sean. And from the state's perspective, Melissa, what does the plan mean to the state?
Well, I think it's a collaborative framework to build partnerships. So you can see some of those up here represented today. But whether that's tribal, federal, state, local, community, irrigation, environmental interests, all coming together to look at ways to improve water supply for people, for fish, for business, for agriculture in the face of climate change. So we're overall looking at a framework to improve the water supply, knowing that things are projected to get worse down the road.
Thank you. And Phil, from the Yakama Nation's perspective and the Director of the Natural Resources, what does this plan mean to the nation?
So when you talk about water, it's a connection to all things, all our foods, all our feasts, all our dinners. We start with water and we end with water. But more than that, I think it goes into the Yakama Basin Integrated Plan is about a long history, a challenging history, a history and understanding that history, but finding a way to find a path to move forward. And so that connection to our people who came before us, that led us, and the Yakima Valley has always been a rich, beautiful place that supported our communities, and as it does today, and I'm saying all of our communities. And part of what the integrated plan to us is bringing that part back, the part where salmon were rolled into the land and into those things. And the other part, I think, is having real conversations, finding avenues to work together to solve some serious issues, serious problems, and to respect and value each other's input and how we talk to each other and how we are committed to this greater place of who we are. And finally, it's for our future. It's for the generations to come. As we in the valley, as we tribal members and our people, leaving something better off than what you started with is always our goal. And so those are some of the basic, things that we put into that path, that history to where we are and what we're trying to do, so that there is a future for our people.
I want to stay here with you, Phil, because you bring up issues, and I think it's important for the audience to understand the history of issues, and that there were decades of disputes on bona fide issues tied directly to treaty obligations, directly to the history of the movement out west and what it looked like after the 1900s when the Bureau of Reclamation started irrigation projects to attract farmers to come to this area. So starting with that history and those issues, I want to work with Phil and just move down the line. I want everybody to focus on their stakeholder as the farmer, federal government, county, irrigation districts, and the tribe. What are some of those historical issues that led to this culminating point?
So to start off with, I think there's been a long history. Our people, we're fishermen. Our people are tied to the land and our foods. And being fishermen, our people fought in court. We went to the highest courts in the nation in 1905, the Winans case. And knowing that history, we've always been challenged. Our treaty has always been challenged into those places. And to understand, we finally won U.S. v. Washington, half the fish. But actually, half the fish came from U.S. Oregon and the Bologna decision before that. And And we're the only tribe that is actually USV Washington, USV Oregon. But in the late 70s, our leadership, they saw this place where as a people, we were, the fish were disappearing, that our place was diminishing, that our place on the river, what good is a treaty right if there's nothing there? And instead of sitting there, they said, we're not going to depend upon the state. We're not going to depend upon the feds. We need to do it ourselves. And our tribe has been working towards that every day since then. And those state and federal agencies have been our partners. But our actions and our part, they invested in people like myself to go to college and to understand education. But they also invested in biologists, and they said, we're going to lead in science. We're going to use all the tools in the toolbox to do the work that we're doing. And I think that's important. And so more of my question, do I go into the integrated plan part, or did you want me to?
Let's hold. That's a good starting point.
Okay.
Wendy?
So I just wanted to point to the map behind us and sort of set the table in terms of the infrastructure that we currently have. At the top of the map are 3 reservoirs, Ketchlis, Cochise, and Cle Elum. That holds 3/4 of the storage in the Yakima Basin. The rest of it is on the Natchez Arm. On your left side is where the Natchez is, between Bumping and Rimrock reservoirs, hold the remainder of about 250,000 acre feet. So there's a total of 1 million acre feet of storage in the Yakima Basin. Reclamation delivers 2.3 million acre feet on an average year to farms and throughout the basin through capture and reuse, but also we rely on snowpack. Currently, we are in the 3rd year of a 3-year drought, of a consecutive drought, and currently our projection is about 48% supply for irrigation districts that were built as part of the Yakima project. So JR was right that in 1905, reclamation came into the basin, but we were invited to do so. The mission of reclamation is to develop the arid West, and we are only in the 17 western United States, and we provided a lot of infrastructure. But as Phil remarked, through time and over appropriation of those waters, we in the 80s ran the river dry. The river ends up being the canal system because it's delivering all of the water to the various irrigation districts, both senior and paradable districts. So we have, a lot of work has been put into recovering from where we were in the 1980s and a lot of the conflict, and we're working together to try and figure out how we can balance the needs of both in-stream and out-of-stream. And I'm proud of where we've come. We have a long way to go. And part of what we've been working on is, and part of the promise with the integrated plan is that we provide fish passage at all the reservoirs. And I'm happy to say that as of today, we have passage mostly complete at Cle Elum for downstream passage for juvenile smolts, and we're going to start construction of passage at Clear Creek Reservoir, which is just right above Rimrock. So.
Thank you.
From municipal, because of the court cases that Phil spoke of and the over-appropriation that Wendy spoke of course, the county, from a planning perspective, we are required to issue permits for building. And that is typically what happens is that there have also been court cases where it has made the county a decision maker on verifying whether or not someone has legally and readily available water before we can issue a permit. Gone are the days before adjudication where you could buy a piece of land out west and drill a hole and water would come out and it was yours. You could try that now, but you won't get very far. So we are dealing with over-allocation and the very real impacts of having water rights that are competing in a lot of times. And we have to find a way to make sure that we are increasing supply or mitigating for that use so that we can ultimately issue our permits. That's the goal. We want to increase development. We also need to make sure that obviously the county has a vested interest in protecting our senior water right holders and our pro-ratables because they drive our economy. We're also concerned about tourism and the impacts of recreation. So really though, from the county's perspective, this allows us to be able to justify and represent to the state Department of Ecology that we have done our due diligence and that someone is able to access the water on their property for the use, the beneficial use for which the water right exists or for what their intended use of it is. And we have become fully integrated with the state and federal government and the Yakima Nation, so much so that we have to have daily conversations on this to make sure that we anticipate what a response might be when someone comes to us in our planning department and says, I would like to use the water right that I have or use my property for this intended use. How do we make sure that we can find a way to get to yes, that's the goal, without having a negative impact on those other right holders. So everything is very much related, but we're trying to find a way to get to yes that respects all of the competing interests that exist.
Okay, so I have a lot to say, but I have a limited amount of time. So I'm going to see if I can have permission to try to get this in 5 minutes.
Yes,
Is that okay?
Yes.
And Commissioner, could you please start a stopwatch for me? So only way, I'll be droning on for 2 hours. So I'll do this as quickly as I can of how we got to where we are and where we're headed. And I started following this basin and its water supply closely in 1977 as a result of that 1977 drought. However, I remember kids on the school bus in 1973 saying, my dad says we're not going to have any water this year. And I just thought, what are they talking about? That's crazy. So now we're going to take us back to, and I will get this done in this period of time, but I'm going to take us back to about the 1855 treaty time. And we know about the Autanam Mission. We know that there was some irrigation occurring then. And then after that, settlers, people, non-native people started coming from all over the place into the Yakima River Basin. And then diversions were dug out of creeks, generally the places that are down low, easy to get to. So people dug ditches and they put it out on fields. We know the hops started real early here, very successful. Then fruit and all kinds of different crops were being grown up and down the valley. But it was always those areas that were close to the river, close to the streams that were easy to get water out. So those would be those would be the senior water users, the very first users, first in time, first in right. About 1902, as Wendy mentioned, the Reclamation Act passed, and here came reclamation. So we had, prior to that, the simpler, easier, less expensive to put in ditches. Some were more complicated than others that you can see around the valley. But as a result of the 1902 Reclamation Act, the state of Washington looked at all those people that are irrigating and said, okay, well, that's how much they're using. And there were some limiting agreements signed. We'll hold them to that. And the state said, okay, reclamation, here's how much water we think that there is available. And then you can have that amount of water to design this grandiose project throughout the basin, which Wendy described. So then that started coming in, and things were moving along, systems were getting built, the dams were getting planned and put into place that Wendy described. And things were going along okay, and oh man, we had a drought headed into the late 30s and into the 40s, and there was a lawsuit. Kittitas Reclamation District that I managed sued the Sunnyside Valley Irrigation District, and there was a big court fight, and then there was a consent decree as a result of that said, well, this is how it's going to be distributed. And guess what? We went into a flood cycle, and the whole Columbia River system was being operated for flood control. Nobody gave it a thought. They didn't even read it. They didn't look at it. And if anybody was talking about building a dam or something, they were talking about doing that for flood control to save the cities. The city of Vanport was wiped out. All those people were killed down there. Water everywhere. And that 1973 year I mentioned on the school bus, that was really the first snippet of what we saw where things were starting to change. We got through that because everything kind of got spread around. 1977, Reclamation said, oh, by the way, Rosa, KRD, 50% of Wapato Irrigation Project, you're only going to get 6% of your water supply this year after 3 decades of 100% water supplies and flood control. That's what kicked off the Yakima River Basin Water Enhancement Project discussions, which passed in 1979. But it's also what started the longest-standing court case in the history of the state of Washington, 43 years with the Yakima adjudication, the Aquavilla case. So then that continued on, and we got right back into fighting. What did that consent decree mean? And no, it didn't mean that. Yes, it did. State court, federal court, everybody was fighting. Irrigation was fighting amongst irrigation. Irrigators were fighting against the tribe. We really did an excellent job of demonizing each other. All the way up through, there was the 79 legislation. I was fortunate enough to be able to work on the phase 2 of that, leading up to the 1994 legislation that President Clinton signed into law. And now we've actually, as a result of Phil, how many minutes do I have? As a result of Phil and Ron Van Gundy's discussions, we actually went away from fighting, started this process, and have come up with this plan, which was really developed because we started creating friendships, not demonizing each other anymore, and now we truly do care about each other and speak for each other. And we've put this together with phase 3 of the enhancement legislation being signed into law in 2019, and we're off to the races. Thank you.
How do you do on time? Sliding in safe. Sean, I want you to walk us through. You're a 5th generation farmer, and your family has experienced drought, and I'm sure your family was farming during many of those and continues to farm during many of these drought years. In our conversation prior to this, you spoke about how over time the farmer has been impacted, farming operations have been impacted, and even the quality of the fruit that you can produce based on the amount of water that you have is based on water allocation. So walk us through some of that historical, school bus conversation that, hey, my dad, the farmer, may not have water this year.
Right. Thank you. So my family has been involved in the tree fruit business here for 125 years or so, and my great-great-grandpa, H.M. Gilbert, we talked about him being involved in getting the Rimrock Lake project funded originally. And then, various family members have been involved in projects throughout the years. But I'd say from the farming perspective, historically, we went through an initial phase where we were very worried about expanding the capacity of farms and getting more acres under irrigation and sort of spreading, where we could plant orchards and that's evolved, and now where we feel like we have plenty of acres that are irrigable now, but our chief concern is reliability, and those drought years. How do we make sure that those drought years have as least harmful impact as possible? And so. In my career, I've been through a couple of droughts now, and the 2015 was one where I was actively managing orchards in drought environment. We would have 2 weeks of water on and 2 weeks of water off, and what happens to an apple orchard when you have 2 weeks of without water in the middle of a Yakima summer is the tree shuts down, and it undergoes a tremendous amount of stress, and the tree is trying to save the life of the tree, and in doing so it pulls away from the fruit, and any version of stress might do that. It could be pest, it could be excessive heat, it could be could be a number of other things, but water is the chief concern here, and is the most common threat. In that 2015 example, we had any of those acres that were cut down, or where the water supply was cut back. We saw terrible production. We saw apples that were too small to make our customers' markets. We saw poor packouts, meaning that apples that otherwise would have been good to go to the fresh market have to be diverted to juice and basically be sold for a tiny fraction of their value. So when we look at the history of reliable water supply in our region, the real impacts of that are felt in the ability to generate a marketable product from our orchards. The fear, it even happened in those drought years that we went through, is that in a permanent crop environment like apples are, you can't just not water the trees for a year. You can't just if you do, that orchard is dead and it won't come back in its form. And an orchard today will cost upwards of $60,000 an acre to reestablish. So you can imagine in the tens of thousands of acres that are under this project, what the scope of the challenge is when we have an unreliable water supply.
Thank you, Sean. Staying with you, Sean, I want you to paint the picture just so that here in the next phase, when we talk about modern day irrigation on the farm, but walk us through what historically was the way that water reached the farm and how you would historically, a little bit of the older technology that was used by farmers to irrigate their farmlands.
Yeah, so I fortunately, thanks to my family's investments, never actually had to manage a real irrigated farm, but there's evidence of the way some of our older farms are set up, where they were built around rill or ditch irrigation, where water was diverted and then gravity directed it to the trees that we wanted them to be directed to. So that style of irrigation, from my understanding, has much more evaporation loss. It requires a lot more water delivered to the site in order to keep the trees alive, and it's less targeted. So you end up applying water maybe where it's not needed. Over time, our industry has gone towards sprinklers, which is the most common way. Your impact sprinklers are still in use, and usually in larger orchards, and more recently, micro sprinklers are the more efficient sprinkler way to go. My dad taught me about drip irrigation that was I think it was studied in Israel or somewhere, very dry, and taught how you could place emitters exactly where you wanted to, right at the specific plant that you wanted to be based at, and those are widely used today in our industry. There's drawbacks to drip irrigation when you're dealing with large canopy trees, and so there's most orchards have a combination of drip irrigation and micro sprinklers today, but we do find that especially compared to the old impact sprinklers, which were more efficient than real irrigation, the micro sprinklers and the drip is a much more efficient use of water, and we estimate somewhere between 2.5 to 3.5 acre feet a year for a typical apple orchard.
Thank you, Sean. Melissa, a lot of people may not realize that water law and the intersecting interests, the state has a really big say, and some would argue might carry the biggest weight on making decisions related to water use throughout its regional jurisdiction. Of course, balancing all of the other counter interests that sit at this table. So can you highlight some of the state's historical, balancing of ensuring water use, its policies, and just take us through some of the history on that point?
Yeah, I was going to give a little history lesson, but Urban provided that already. So I'm going to cut down my time on my
Urban
storytelling.
answered 40 questions of mine.
Yeah. But I'll build on some of what Urban provided, kind of from the state history perspective. The oldest water rights are really the Yakama Nation's time immemorial water rights. And people, the next set of water rights came at westward expansion and as people started settling in the state. So some of those rights date back to the 1850s, 1870s, as people started moving westward. And the state water code passed in 1917. So there was a recognition that, gee, there's a need for water resource management. And the legislature passed the water code that's now over 100 years old. The state is charged with managing the water resources, and that comes to be through the Department of Ecology. Our office, the Office of Columbia River, is a little bit different charge in that we are given a crystal ball. I call it the crystal ball tool, and we're supposed to be solving the problems of the future as well. And so not only do some of us do water resource management, but we're supposed to be looking at how to make improvements in the future as well. So think about that history and the water rights and things being over appropriated, and reclamation comes in and says we can, help and build storage. Some of those water rights that have a 1905 priority date are junior. Think about that. 1905, they're junior, they're curtailed. You heard Urban say 1 year they got 6%. The water supply forecast just came out last week for 2025. It may be as low as 48%. It's hard to operate a farm like Sean just talked about when you only have 48% of your water supply. So the state's really in this for looking at the water supply needs of the future, that ecosystem restoration, the economics for the community, and the natural resources that are out there as well.
Thank you. And you bring up the time immemorial rights that the Yakama people and the indigenous people of this region have held since time immemorial. One of the things that in my learning of this area is a historical place known as Celilo Falls. And Celilo Falls was one of the most dynamic trading areas across this North American continent. People came from all over the world to trade there. It was abundant in fish, water, and life. So I want to focus a little bit on the damage that has been done to this region by ultimately using a system of lakes, somewhat dams, right, for different interests, that really took a thriving area of water, fish, to almost some species of fish being at the verge of extinction, some being extinct. And I want to ask Phil about how dire it really was for the fish and the water during many of these flashpoint times. Phil?
So I think it's important to understand that, again, the history and the things that have happened in the Yakama Basin especially. When all the dams were put in, Sockeye once was one of the strongest runs in the Yakama. It was extirpated. It was no longer here. Coho. And you can go down through the species that, steelhead is the one that is challenged. And I think an important part, and I'm going to stick to the Yakama now, I can go on forever for about Celilo and the Columbia River and the importance of these places to us as a people. But the reason the Yakama Valley, we had so many village sites is because Yakama Valley was second to only the snake and the returning fish that would come here. That our people, we're connected to these places and who we are as a people. And when you see these changes, when I grew up and I hear all the great stories about Parker Dam, from, Yellow Wash could tell you those, but we can't do them in public. But when our people can go and fish just 5 miles from home, and now we don't have those opportunities because of those pieces. But the great thing about what our people said was, we're going to change. We're going to participate in this. We're going to go and do the work. And if you look at the programs and the things that we do, we're fixing habitat. We actually run hatcheries, facilities. The salmon don't have access to all the places they once did, so the supplementation needs to happen so that we can continue to carry and honor the fish the way we're supposed to. And as you add these things up, you understand that the fish, the strength of the salmon has always been, they're, I always think they're like us, or we're like them, that we survive and move. And if you give us the opportunity, they will thrive. And you see the work we're doing with Coho, and you see the returns that started to happen. 2015 was a tough year, not just for the farmers, but it was for fish. We were seeing the sockeye starting to build, and it had a big setback. You saw that with each of the species, and we're still working on that recovery from those things. But as you say, they've got the small dams, they got predators, and there's just pieces out there. There's the Bateman Island Causeway that this dam put on us down at the mouth of the Yakima on the south side of this. The river used to flow all the way around there, and that backs up the river, causes a thermal block, causes issues with the river. And so to understand that as a tribe, we took the investment and we looked at every section of the river. We're sitting there saying, what's wrong here, here, and here? And let's prioritize those things. And then we also challenged the state. We challenged Bureau of Reclamation every time we had the opportunity. People always ask me why Cleon became the place where we did the fish passage with the thing. It had to do with a lawsuit. They were rebuilding Catchless Dam right there off of I-90, and we said you should have fish passage if you're rebuilding that. And the Bureau of Reclamation, it's a safety as dam thing. It's not they're not rebuilding the dam. And we ended up doing a settlement, and in that settlement with WDFW, Bureau of Reclamation, and we said we would then build the science to look at Cleom, because Cleom has the best habitat above it. And so there's miles and miles of folks. And so as I'm saying, those obstacles have been part of that. The culverts, the roads, the systems, it's always been hot and dry in eastern Washington. It's always been a part. But why were they so robust? Because the floodplain interacted with the groundwater, and there was a connection in a manner that cold water would always be available to come and out during the year. And that work and that history that you have also leads to kind of where the tribe is building and doing that connection into place. And so I hope one of the things that I think has been important is we could go into all the things before they put all the diversions. They did not have passage, so our juvenile fish were out swimming in fields, adding nutrients to fields when they weren't necessary. You can go into those things where what you had, but the thing was there was always that fight going on about fish. And one of the things that I think for us in the perspective that needs to be important, the first economy in the Northwest was our economy. Yakima Nation traded with the West Side and traded all the way to the plains. We go buffalo hunting today because of that trade network that we created in history. We're one of the few tribes in the country that actually has a commerce clause, the right to travel and take our goods any place. And those things become important for all the other things, but it was because of the salmon. It was because of our foods. It was because of what the Yakima Valley and many of these Wenatchee and many of these other places, what they provided to our community, so that our strength was always, we had, we knew how to take care of the food, and we had trading partners that we would trade. And so we had teepees because we traded with the plains. We had Dentilium that ended up on the plains because we traded with the coastal. And the relationship, we had the cedar baskets that were made from, and that's a part of all of our families' connection to these places that we will go to. And I think that's always been an important part of our story. But more than anything, this story with the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan is returning some of that focus back to those resources that we're talking about. We're asking for the world in a lot of ways, but we're asking that first economy be celebrated and honored, and that we find ways to find solutions for those fish. We're not sitting there aiming at. We want farming to happen in the valley. The strength of that economy is the strength of the tribe. But we also don't believe that the choices made at times has always been to the benefit of those values that we want protected. And when we come, we will come hard in that manner. But when we work together, the solutions that you really find are fascinating. Watching, Urban, move water in 2015 to keep fish alive. And that was innovation that wouldn't have been a specialty of the tribe. But because irrigators do know how to move water, it was beautiful to see. And those are the things that I think are part of what we're talking about. We can sit there, but the tribe is, we're going to bring beavers back one way or another. We're going to bring the systems into places and the ecological ground that we're doing. And I'll just say that, I can go, like I said, I can probably go on for a long time on these things, but more than anything, we're just like the salmon, we're surviving. And we're going to find our way. And there's obstacles, there's dams and all the other obstacles. And we're going to work with our partners or any other avenue to try to find solutions to these things. And that goes throughout not just the Yakima, but to the whole Columbia Basin where our people are involved in. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Phil earlier brought up science-based solutions to move forward. And he used a few terms that I want the panel to help move us to our next period in our school session, moving away from history to science class. He used terms like thermal block, and we've been using terms like hydrological basin system. Wendy, let's start with you. Give us your best as the engineer here. Give us your best science interpretation as to what some of these concepts and terms actually mean. Good luck.
I'll do the layman's version.
Okay, we'll start with Amanda. Get the layman. Yeah.
From the layman version, well, I think kind of building off what Phil just described, if you design something for a single outcome, if you've designed it right, you'll get that single outcome. And conceptually, what we're talking about is designing different ways to do the same thing, but having multiple outcomes, all of which are going to impact users. So for layman's terms, why don't we design things that have many different outcomes? And that's what we're going to get. So technical version, Wendy.
Or I can take it if you need more time to think of your answer.
Okay, you go ahead.
You want to? Really?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Is that
Yes,
okay, JR?
absolutely.
All right. So what does it all mean? Do we tie things back to the science, and what does the science mean? Well, we have lots of science. When we started this process, after Phil and Ron Van Gundy got together, and we were having our first meetings, and this very diverse group of people is sitting around the table, and everybody's looking at each other, and they didn't like each other and didn't have any relationships, and everybody's kind of like suspiciously glancing back and forth. And we started our discussion to really what we did was to come up with a common understanding of the science, a common understanding of the facts. And somebody between reclamation and ecology had a big hand truck and wheeled in a stack of studies and scientific volumes that were about 7 feet tall, that how much studying had been gone on around here in the Yakima Basin only, and nothing was getting done. So yeah, we have a lot of science. We have the most comprehensive USGS and groundwater analysis that they've ever done in the Yakima Basin. We have a lot of science, but really what it means is, at least to us, is as we got past that not talking to each other, became friends, had relationships, from trust to trust, respect, friendships. We have figured out how we can take those volumes of science and come up with ways, like in our instance, where we can be improving our irrigation canal system with piping and lining and saving that water and making better water deliveries to the farms, more consistent deliveries to the farms, and at the same time making room in that canal system for dropping off water, as Phil mentioned, to streams for fish, to alluvial fans for groundwater storage, for some of the conservation water going into new storage projects like we're going to build at Springwood. So the science gives us the facts, the basis. We came up with a common understanding of it, and now those of us through a team approach are being incredibly creative to do what we know how to do, which is not think about ourselves, but what makes it better for everybody. And then we go to Congress and ask for funding, and they like it because usually people don't talk to each other. Thanks.
Okay. So, thanks, Urban. And Amanda, I think that it comes back to continuing to work together. So the legislation that Urban mentioned in 1994, part of that was for us to look at what we could do, what the in-stream flow needs were, what the biologically based flow needs were for fish, how much could we do with conservation, before we started looking at additional storage in the basin. And Urban's right, we have done a lot of studies, and we have volumes and volumes of reports, and I think part of our strength is that we haven't ignored that and tried to recreate it. We've learned from what we had. In the late 90s, Jack Stanford did the REACHES report, and basically the takeaway is what Phil was talking about in terms of the river having these floodplain areas, and they're talked about as beads on a string, where there was refuge and rearing opportunities for fish in between. So in the Kittitas Basin, that's near our Shockey property, where we've created floodplain restoration habitat, about 230 acres. There's in the Wapato Reach and the Tanaway. So throughout the Yakima Basin, and I think that's kind of the takeaway for me working on this, is that in the Yakima Basin, because the riverine corridor is not overly developed, we have a potential here to restore fisheries like nowhere else. And I think we're working on that, and I think the fact that the group understands that, and we've had several paradigm shifts from having these communications and talking with each other and collaborating on things, is that having Urban turn water out of his canal and put it into the streams that his canal crosses to water up for fish, super important. And immediately you see the fish returning to those streams. So we're continuing to develop the science, part of our process, and any new projects that we do, we are going to do, all the environmental compliance, all of the feasibility analysis. So with inherent in our process, there's continuation of analysis and evaluation that occurs because that's a requirement, but also because working together, we're able to sort of realize the synergies of having a canal system going over these streams, and understanding that if some of that water were to be siphoned out and put in the streams, that would help the fish. And having that synergy and that understanding that if the fish are healthy and succeeding, then the farms will also be healthy and succeeding. And Phil talked about how the tribe has approached this, and as the federal government, we have trust responsibilities. Reclamation's very unique in our authorities in that there's no organic act that put reclamation together or authorizes reclamation, but each specific project has its own authorization. The Yakima Project has an authorization. The Yakima River Basin Water Enhancement Project has several authorizations from 79, 1994, and 2019. And so within those abilities, we've added fish and wildlife as a purpose for the Yakima Project and municipal as a purpose for the Yakima Project, in addition to irrigation and flood control and power. So, so back to the Yakima Nation, in terms of the Yakima Basin, they are the largest water user with the Wapto Irrigation Project. The Wapto Irrigation Project is a BIA-run project, but it's also the largest Indian irrigation project in the nation. And so we have authorities that allow us to provide for system improvements on WIP. We have a specific authority to provide for Toppenish Creek Corridor Plan. So there's the ability for the federal government to help support and enable Yakima Nation to do a lot of things with restoration efforts. And we're proud and honored to be part of their success. It really is important that we continue to work collaboratively together, because that's the only way that we're really going to make a difference.
Phil?
I want to add, just because some people don't understand how the Wapto Irrigation Project came to being. And this was an agreement between the tribe and the federal government, because we actually were supposed to have a 6x6 square mile reservation up in right around Leavenworth. And that was supposed to be the Wenatchee band of our people. And we kind of, it was, they didn't, you already had all the people move in there, and so they couldn't just go kick out everybody. And so we were kind of forced into this agreement. And they came back and they made a promise that they will build this irrigation project onto the reservation. And that is what started the long-term history with Wapto Irrigation Project. They promised that we'd never have to pay for water, and that we would always have as much water as we needed to farm for our community. And so when you look, and that was about 1905 time too. I mean, when you look at decisions onto that history, and I think that's an important part of understanding where irrigation really did come onto the reservation and those things. So I don't think a lot of people really understand that history. Thank you.
Urban?
I just wanted to add one short footnote to one of the things that Wendy had mentioned when she said that we added fish and wildlife to the Yakima Project purposes. That was actually, so when the Reclamation Act was passed, when the Yakima Project started, fish and wildlife was never a Yakima Project purpose until we got together and put together the 1994 Phase 2 Yakima River Basin Enhancement Project law with Congress, and with agreement from irrigation, all of the irrigation interests, we got that through and added that as a project purpose. So, and then of course we've improved upon it with more authorizations in 2019 in Phase 3. So that was what she meant by that. Thanks.
Junior, too, I want to add to that, you know, good, when we're talking about the natural environment and restoring our native species, good fish habitat is good human habitat. And when we talk about the science, there is so much science going into our floodplain restoration, and a lot of it proved that in doing so, it's kind of funny to think about, but by increasing the floodplain of the Yakima River and returning it more to its natural flow, we actually remove flood risk for our municipal infrastructure. We actually take property out of flood zones, which lowers, it expands our ability to develop areas. It removes people from a flood zone that they don't have to have flood insurance, which reduces the cost for their housing. We're able to take, for our current plan, it will take the entire water treatment facility for the city of Yakima out of flood zone, which all of a sudden benefits all of the users of the Yakima system for water treatment. So this is why we say when we look at multi-benefit, yes, we're restoring fish habitat, but it's going to make a huge financial impact for the better on our municipal, on our users for that reason. And so if you design it for multiple outcomes, you'll get those outcomes.
Thank you.
And I'll just say there's a lot of photos going on behind us. One of them was of Nelson Dam, where they removed the diversion dam and put in more of a sluiceway. That kind of is a great example of the multiple objectives that Commissioner McKinney was talking about. And the what that does is it provides for rough and channel for fish passage. It opened up 300 miles of fish passage above that diversion dam that was blocked, and also provides for a way for the city of Yakima to get water out for their irrigation system. So, I mean, it's just a win-win-win all the way around.
Where was Nelson Dam, Wendy?
On the Natchez River.
But where will people see it if they drove by?
Oh, yeah, right off of Highway 12. Yeah, so you can Google it.
Look up.
If you're headed out to Natchez, you'll see it. But it's a good point. It was a low-head dam built for a specific purpose. But by simply redesigning it, it still has its intended purpose. It's still diverting the water, but it's a roughened channel, greater floodplain, so it's better for fish. By the way, it's also better for recreators. It was a very dangerous place. People wouldn't take their children there. And now you can actually go down there and hang out by the river, and it's beautiful, it's peaceful, and it's safe. But you're still having the diversion, you're increasing fish habitat. It also allows for greater sediment flow because as we know, when we've had wildland fires up in the forests and then the first rains come, we start to get a lot of sediment moving down the river, which is exactly what happened several years ago. And we had to shut down the water treatment facility for the city of Yakima for 3 days. So by designing it this way, it's better for people, it's better for the environment, it's better for our infrastructure. That means we're not spending money that we shouldn't be spending. So again, it's a win-win-win. And that is a great example of a project.
It opened up the floodplain in this location as well, too. Made it less of a flood risk.
Phil, you had a thought?
Oh, I was just going to say, you drive over the Green Bridge, look off to the left, and it's right
Okay,
there.
okay.
Just so people know where it's at.
Phil can take you there.
Yeah. Melissa?
Yeah, I didn't put this in my bio, but I want to put my nerdy science hat on. I'm a hydrogeologist by trade, and I don't get to do that part of my job very often. So to hit on the science-based solution piece, I want to really highlight the diversity of the folks that we have involved in the integrated plan. We've got engineers, hydrogeologists, fish biologists, farmers that you could say are soil scientists by trade, and give a shout out to some of the universities. I know we've got several CWU professors in the crowd today. We have partnered with Western Washington University on occasion, as well as Oregon State University. That really just brings home this diverse group of folks that we have, whether they're measuring temperature of water, aquatic plant-like research, studying baby fish trying to get out of the system. All of these things are important components. And as we implement those multi-benefit projects that have been talked about, we're also doing monitoring. And we want to ensure that what we are implementing is actually working.
Melissa, I want to stay with you. At the state level, obviously you have probably teammates that are, scientists and working in this space. From a science-based perspective, are there any state methods or scientific methods that it's implementing, especially with the change in climate and increased drought across many areas? Is there anything that you can share on the state level related to that science?
Well, I started saying it already, but I think that science-based approach is very important, and understanding what the problem is, implementing projects that achieve benefits to solve that problem, and then monitoring is an important component as well.
Thank you. So, Sean, you will bring us home into our break, our soil scientist. No pressure other than to say, you and I talked a little bit about how just farming science has changed from the different way that you had umbrella canopy, big trees, to trellis systems, to, of course, right, evolve with how to conserve water. So bring us home, as you and I had a good conversation about how farms today are looking to conserve water and finding ways to do that.
Yeah, I think to Melissa's point, we're all soil scientists to an extent. We're farmers trying to repeat the process of bringing beautiful fruit into the world year after year, and sort of trying to problem solve all the different ways that can go wrong. I'd say one of the coolest phenomena of tree fruit farming in our region is the expansion of organic farming. There's a demand for organically grown produce, throughout the world, but there's very few places that can execute on it, and the unique microclimates that we have in this region actually bode really well for organic farming, and there's extensions of that with regenerative organic and other practices that are monitoring soil health, that are monitoring the flora and fauna around an orchard, and then objectively measuring, are they getting better because we're here, or are they getting worse? And those are things that I think that because of the dry climate that we're in, we can actually have lower impact farming occur here, which I think is just really cool. But from a water conservation standpoint, the drip irrigation is a major tool that we use for making sure that we're not over irrigating. And another thing I forgot to bring up earlier is the ability to monitor and report on it real time. And so one of the neatest things is that we all of our farm managers have an app on their phone that can show what our soil moisture is, and what we found, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, is more often than not we were over irrigating, and before we knew exactly what was happening, or in real time, we would irrigate up to the at least the minimum level that an orchard needed, but oftentimes exceeding that, and there's harmful effects in an orchard when you exceed the amount of water that a tree needs. And so a recent phenomenon is the ability to get the measuring tools into the decision maker's hands, and be able to report on it and act on it in a real-time basis.
Thank you, Sean. We have a couple minutes. I'm going to add one more question, because you hear of contemporary methods of science, but in reality, this group benefits from a variety of different cultures and stakeholders coming together. But I want to ask Phil about the impact that traditional ecological knowledge has on this group, including just as the people who've been here the longest and know this area, for generations, the knowledge that the traditional ecological knowledge brings to this group.
So the really important part when you talk about that is there's a long history of our people and the connection to river, understanding, and those changes that have happened, and recognizing what happened to cause those changes. And so when you talk about stories and legends and the pieces, those stories are connected to a reason why salmon did well in this area. And that's a history of our story way of that. And I think that opens your eye to understanding that there was also something, and the thing is, as a tribe, we actually have a huge level of study that we do, just scientific, just on behalf. We go get funding from BPA or NOAA or all the other federal agencies. We have to bring the best science that you have. We actually have a science fair for both the Yakima Basin, as well as down on the river with our southern territories. But I think if you listen to our people and the history, you understand, and I'll use Toppenish Corridor as an example. When Urban talked about the flood in the 70s, I remember a bunch of, I get told quite a bit that they put in a bunch of You know what, it's slipping my mind, but they came in and did flood abatement, and so they put in dikes, they put in all this stuff. And all of a sudden, they set it up where the river flows out of the system so quick. And the Toppenish fan used to kind of open up. We didn't have houses built in these areas. And the water would go, and the aquifer in White Swan was recharged every year. But they did those things, and so we're spending, millions of dollars to take those dikes out and try to get the floodplain to interact with the water again. Try to drive those things, and we've been doing that without telling a lot of people. We with some of these things, and we put 3,000 to 5,000 acre feet of water into the ground during what we use our off of Toppenish Creek, and we use our pieces, and you're seeing springs kind of pop up, and it's that science, that understanding that I get told very deliberately, we don't know what we're doing, scientists, but if you listen to what they're saying, that's the work we're doing. We're out there fixing old things, but also returning it back to what they remember. And so that's also an important part. Why are these things so connected? Because the river, the creeks, these things supported us in a way, and our people knew these things in ways that I will never know myself. That many of our generation, we learn as we go, but they were so intimate understanding of these things. And so from Frog's Home to all these different things, there were purposes onto why this salmon only came up this far. And there's reasons why. And so I just think that part is an important part of the long-term history of what we see as science, what we see as part of our story. Because all of our story is part of that long-term historical science.
Phil brings up Frog's Home. Frog's Home's a whole nother long story that we could spend all day on. So just 2 words mean another dozen hours of discussion.
Well, thank you guys for kicking us off. We're going to have a 15-minute break, and when we get back, we'll talk about building a future for water, wildlife, and working lands, and we'll dive into the plan, including its 7 elements that this group of people works to balance on an array of projects. But let's come back at about 10:47, and we'll kick off the second half of our presentation. Thank you.
Fill out their questions.
And if you have any questions, there are some cards that are circulating. Please turn those questions in to myself or Liz or Craig. And there is a basket collecting them in the back, and we'll try to get to some of those questions at the end.
We'll start a movie in about 6 minutes.
Okay, and in about 6 minutes, we'll have a video playing during the break if you'd like to watch.
The Yakima Integrated Plan is huge in its scope. It covers and supports so many different values.
The major components are environmental conservation and water enhancement and water supply. To capture water, retime water, and then make sure that we've got enough storage for not just crops and out-of-stream uses in communities and families, but also for fish and habitat. And so when you add that together with conservation of land, that is the Yakima Integrated Plan.
It's one of these projects that comes along once in a lifetime.
We know all of the stories about how, in the development of the population, we screwed things up. I would like to think that there's going to be some success stories about how we left something better than when we got here.
In 1977 is really the year that got us started on this pathway that we are on now.
We had a drought and it was devastating. We've had droughts since, but I just remember my dad's hands started shaking and they never stopped that year.
We're seeing with the climate change scenarios, no water, no supply, nothing to irrigate with if we don't do anything.
We're a 5th generation farm family here in the valley. and we enjoy growing the crops. And the integrated plan is becoming a very big step in our futures.
With water, you know you can sustain it and pass it on to the next generation.
We're at Roy Farms, our Moxie location. We're a century-old farming operation. This will be our 108th harvest here in the valley. Roughly a third of the world's hop production comes out of the greater Yakima Valley here. Water is very important to my future, my family's future, and the farm's future, and the 300 employees that we carry year-round around here.
The foundation of this industry, especially craft, is focused on the new and expressive forms of aroma hops and flavor hops, and those almost exclusively come out of the Yakima River Basin. So we have aroma hops that will give you melon flavors right now, pine flavors, citrus flavors, mango flavors, peach flavors, blueberry undertones. That creativity all comes from the Yakima River Valley.
Several different groups of people who typically have been at odds with each other. It's brought them together where they all want to see the same thing.
There's just been a tremendous amount of progress to build the relationships necessary for people to see the values and interests of other people and see where different interests converge.
We needed to make a real alliance with the Yakama Nation. I think that we really made a friend.
We had to learn how to communicate with each other, how to learn to listen as well as talk.
A farmer or rancher needs clean, pristine water, so do our fish. It not only provides fish passage past the reservoir dams, but it also provides protection for the habitat, restoration for the systems, for our fish. The salmon are a part of us, a part of who we are. Just being able to bring these fish back, a species that's been missing for over 100 years, it's something that's been missing spiritually and physically.
Yes, I'm a Lakota Sioux, was raised up out here on the Yakima Indian Reservation. We have people from around the world, from other countries and stuff, come and see the way we do things.
Joe and I sit around and say, oh, that's a pretty fish, and people think we're nuts. But knowing where it started and you're looking at it and you're thinking, wow, that's fantastic. It's really neat.
The farmers obviously like it because then they can put water on their crops or on their trees, and they are going to have good crops at the end of everything. The fly fishermen actually do benefit from it. The rafters benefit from it as well.
For me as a chef, selfishly, it's great because I get to work with all the beautiful product, all the salmon that's coming out of that river, all the beautiful produce that's, coming from that area. When it comes to water, we're figuring out a way to all work together to be able to make sure everyone has what they need in order for there to be a good, stable, local environment.
There's been a real sincere commitment by the agricultural community to invest in more efficient use of water.
We're planning on conserving another 170,000 acre-feet of water in the Yakima Basin through things like the sprinkler systems, more plastic piping.
Every single facet of this project is something that is going to increase the ability for people to benefit from it.
This plan touches everybody in the state. Looking to the future, it's the only way that we're going to accomplish some of these big dreams that we have.
It's significant. It's big steps.
We're doing a good thing here.
There's no place in America that should be prouder of their effort as a community than this community.
We're very proud of what we've accomplished.
All right, class is back in session. Yellow Wash has rang the school bell. And so we pivot to current progress and achievements under this collaboration of different partners and stakeholders. So really quickly, let's pivot, and now let's talk about what the integrated plan looks like today. I'll just give a little bit of background, and then I want the panel to just kind of highlight what building a future for water, wildlife, and working lands looks like when they aim to work through and possibly balance the 7 elements of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. If you received one of these, they're on tables throughout, and you turn it to the back page. On the very back page, it will list the 7 elements of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. Number 1, reservoir fish passage. Number 2, structural and operational changes. 3, surface water storage. 4, groundwater storage. 5, habitat, watershed protection and enhancement. 6, enhanced water conservation. And 7, market reallocation. With this general framework in mind, I want to hand it to the panel, and we'll start with Wendy and then kind of work through as you guys raise your hand. I'll let you guys jump in after each other. Give the audience an idea of what YBIP is doing, the plan, and what these 7 elements really are.
One thing before Wendy starts, I just want to tell everybody, this is the good part.
All right.
This is where it gets fun.
Thanks, Urban. So as you can see behind us on the screen, it has a full map of the Yakima Basin, again, with several elements listed and color-coded dots to match each of those elements throughout the basin. There's actually more now through the lower part of the valley as well. So, but again, this was sort of born out of the Yakima Nation and Rose Irrigation District coming together, and Reclamation and Ecology were on a little bit different path to look at storage in the basin. Ever since the 1945 consent decree, we've been looking for storage in the Yakima Basin, and there were several droughts, as Urban mentioned, and so because of that, we were looking at studying Black Rock, which was a 1.3 million acre-foot reservoir in the Moxie Valley, and it would pump water out of the Columbia River. The tribe and Rose Irrigation District wrote us a letter and basically provided the framework that you see behind you that was then worked on since 2009 with a work group of members that represented agencies, tribes, and various groups that either dealt with water or resources that were affected by drought. And because that group came together, we met every 2 weeks and formed a common understanding of what the problem was and part of this, what the solutions could be. We were then able to formulate the plan behind us. And ever since then, we've been, like JR said, going forth and implementing projects associated within each of the elements and what we call a balanced approach. So projects with each element are being worked on currently. So
Phil?
I know Phil wants to talk.
So,
because it's all Phil's fault, really.
not just all my fault. First of all, Wendy kind of gave, the picture, but the one thing about the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan is it became very personal in a lot of different ways, and so I think it's important that I tell this part of the story. And so, I was just a year and a half into my job, and I first want to recognize Yakima Basin Storage Alliance because the storage conversation still is a very important part of the plan for the tribe and for all of us. And so, but they had the Black Rock proposal. And I'm walking into a meeting, we were going into Ecology Building when it was over on the Ave, I guess is the best way to put it. And Ron Van Gundy was out there. He was having a smoke before he came upstairs, and I'm going to talk just like Ron talked to me. And hey Phil, can we talk? I started laughing, and I went, can we talk? I think our attorney would explicit it, knowing that we're talking, and we started laughing, and he asked me what the tribe thought of Black Rock. And first of all, for us, it didn't address what we considered the important parts of what needs to be restored in the fisheries in the Yakima Basin. The best habitat for fisheries are above all these reservoirs, and that was a priority for the tribe. And I think it was an important part of our story. And there's a whole other series of things and recommendations to take. We had spent a lot of effort at putting the Fish and Wildlife to be part of the Northwest Power Act, and when we did that, the intent was to use the resources as the mitigation for the Columbia River dams so that we can use that to actually do fish restoration work and have those things. And so to those things, those were kind of the driving factor I could go into. But also the Columbia River is not, people look at it and say it's not, saying there's all kinds of water there. Most of that water isn't a water right for hydro. And so there isn't as much free water as people think. And inside of that means that, and I don't think hydro is going to give up that water especially during the summer side for the things that we're talking about. And I think sometimes we don't just say that out loud. And so there was a hope, but we're trying to get BPA and the federal agencies to live up to a higher standard on the Columbia. And so that was all these conversations were going. And so Ron, he pretty much said, yeah, they couldn't afford the water if they got it. They couldn't afford to turn it on, but they couldn't afford not to. And that was the start of our conversation. We agreed to meet the next day. And I remember because Tom Ring, he saw me talking to Ron, he ran up to catch up to me right away. Tom worked for the tribe as our hydrogeologist, and someone I respect enormously with what he has done historically for us. But we caught up and we set up to have a meeting the next day. And so it was Rick Velkoff, myself, Ron, and Tom. And we kind of, on a paper like this, we kind of just sketched it out onto which at the time it was six principles. We really didn't talk about that number 2 on the list up there. That wasn't, we were looking at storage as one of them, fish passage at all the reservoirs, and I can go on, and you guys have heard that. And the really unique part was Yakima Nation and Rose Irrigation District, we drafted a letter, and we signed a letter together, and we sent it off to Jay Manning, who's here in the room too, and Ecology, and to the state of Washington, and to the Bureau of Reclamation. And we met the next, but we called Derek Sanderson, and we called Jerry Kelso, and they came and caught up to us. And Bureau of Reclamation agreed to go kind of finish out the environmental assessment environmental work with Black Rock. And Derek went and started, and we started working on the work group and the programmatic, agenda for the other parts. And to me, that set the stage where there was a lot of going on and people, but more than anything, we stuck together. And the other part, I think, since Peter's not here, and I will go into this, was the environmental community was not on board. And some parts they still are not, and I'm not asking them to be. I'm asking them to at least let the process go. But some of the key elements of that was me and Tom and Jeff Taylor went over and gave a presentation on what we as a tribe and how we laid out why this is a good thing for the environmentalists, is good for, and in that meeting and in our conversation, the environmental community did come on board. One of the first projects on the habitat side was the purchase of the Teanaway. and the purchase 50,000 acres in the up in the headwaters of the Teanaway. And to us, that was important because that had a potential for Spring Chinook, and we could do a bunch of restoration work that we had invested in that has some key elements into that. And so as you start the groundwork onto what happened, so the first legislation in 2013, that Governor Inslee did was the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. And the provisions that were part of it was the Teanaway. And having Huntingford advocating for 50,000 acres was the most interesting legislative session I've ever been. And I respect Jim enormously and for stepping forward in that manner. And I think that's an important part that what he did and to that extent, but also making sure that we don't lose track of the storage component. And storage is tougher conversation to get to. And when you talk about last year with the drought, we needed more water to help with fish flows. And we could create problems, and if we could do some of these things with storage to help us, we're aimed at that. And I want to be very clear, the tribe has been very direct about we're willing to go as long as the benefits are not uneven as they have been in the past, and that they're aimed at specific things that we believe and that's the great thing. What shores up, certain things gives us that part. But more, and I'll go more into some of the other projects, but I do think that history was important. Ron passed away in 2017. And I remember his family asked me to speak, and I was shocked, but I remember standing up there and I told his kids that here is the most dedicated farmer I've ever known, and there'll be sockeye in the Yakima Basin in the long term forever because he chose to say, hey, Phil. And I will always respect and honor him in that manner because of, and his family for stepping up in that manner. And I think it's important that we recognize the friendships and the people. And also that continues today with the relationships that I have with people sitting up here and the parties that are involved in the work that we do. We don't always agree, Scott Revelle, but we care about each other. We don't want to see some of the challenges that we have to interfere with the real important part is, Yakima Valley needs the strength. Having fish is just, and having apples, both of them have very important values that make this the strength of the valley, of who we are as a community. And I just wanted to put that picture into there. And I'll tell another piece later, but I'll pass it on to other folks on that story.
Thank you, Phil. Amanda?
I so appreciate when Phil provides the background because I think we really are stewards of our roles. Urban is my uncle. Grew up on that family farm, flood irrigated that Timothy hay. We have the privilege of holding a role and making decisions that we will never see the outcome. It'll be 100 years from now when some of these things are going to really come into fruition and people will see the benefit. We have a lot of conversations internally in our water resources team at the county and with our planning, and when we talk about these projects and the impacts, we know that it takes a long time to get there, and then once something is designed and implemented and successful, obviously in some cases with the Helix, once we actually turn the spigot on, there will be an immediate gratification in some sense, but when you're talking about restoring an environment and a natural ecosystem, it does take time. It took time for it to go away. It'll take time for it to come back. So I think that's just, it's a privilege to be a part and to be a steward of the role. And then I think we'll probably talk in terms of storage, but I guess I wanted to say from a municipal standpoint, a lot of, it's our job, and my job specifically, I see is I have a strong requirement to be an effective communicator to the public so that they understand, that they believe, that they see and believe that the work that is being done is having a positive impact, and we are being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars, both locally, state, and federally on these projects. And I think that storage is a key focus, that we're hyper-focused as a group on this going forward. But it's not because it wasn't a focus for the previous 10 years or decades. But there are certain difficulties with finding areas and properties and permitting and willing property owners and going through studies and feasibility designs, and those take time versus a lot of the low-hanging fruit, if I may, has been in water conservation, for example. But that, of course, was a lot easier because you already have a system and folks who are owning that system and willing and wanting to make those improvements and willing to invest their own dollars in seeing that water conservation be done. So it is a lot easier than, not easy, but easier than building really strong, meaningful storage. And then I will just, to put a pin in it and just say that I came into this community when BlackRock, I came back to the community, I should say, when BlackRock was really there. I remember the Rotary presentations and getting really excited about it. And then the more that you learned about it, we understood that there were some complexities with it. And what I'm seeing as we talk about the shifting of more common sense, how do we achieve these things in a way that are going to have less negative impacts, but that's sometimes shifting our focus and getting bigger wins in the form of smaller projects. And so what I think we're going to be talking about is that instead of having some large-scale storage, we're also looking at, well, how can we actually utilize smaller spaces and have it add up? And now that we're thinking about it, what does it look like if we have these smaller storage up and down the basin so that we can, again, better time our water? So it becomes a lot more feasible to have smaller scale storage in more areas, and it makes the system better. And quite frankly, that's how the system naturally worked before we got here, were these alluvial fans being flooded in 100-year floodplains. And that's why we draw deep water out of deep water wells, is because of a system that functioned for thousands of years before we arrived here. So I will just hand it over now to Urban.
Is that okay, JR?
Yes.
I'll not go on for an hour. I'll try to keep this one short. I just keep telling myself that. But I will start out when this wonderful young person showed up on the farm every other weekend. I was already making my trips to Washington, D.C., working on storage, since theme is storage. And at that time, it was the 1980s, and we were talking about what we called at the time the Big Fix Bill. And we were going to make Bumping Lake 500,000 or 530,000 acre feet in size, and that was going to be the answer to all of our problems. And we were talking about that through the late 80s into the early 90s, and then it became quite clear that as the presidential administrations changed and we got into the Clinton administration, we were told that every dam that was ever built in the United States was already built, and there was never going to be another dam built anywhere in the United States ever again. I was thinking, man, now what are we going to do? Well, so we started, this Big Fix bill had all kinds of pieces in it. And by the time we got to the 1994 legislation that President Clinton actually signed, our Phase 2 legislation, we had just taken the conservation section out of that Big Fix bill, and it didn't have storage in it. But as I was actually testifying to Congress at the time and was saying that, okay, this is our conservation bill, this is an interim step to additional storage, and then while as part of that Phase 2 legislation, we were given the charge to take a look at the basin, see what conservation could do, and if we couldn't solve the problem in this basin with conservation, which we can't, then we would come back and talk about additional storage, which is what we did in this 2019 Phase 3 legislation, along with a bunch of other stuff that then was signed into law at the federal level. So we obviously backed away from the big, giant bumping, which wasn't going to work. And then we started looking at other things. Phil and Wendy mentioned Black Rock. Well, that wasn't going to work for cost reasons, plus Department of Energy at Hanford didn't want their nukes floating up out of the ground with return flow, so that one was out. So then we started well through this other process, coming up with something, how can we do that? And we looked at several different sites. Weimer was one that was we thought was pretty promising. It was on the Eaton Ranch between Sela and Ellensburg, and the family decided they didn't want to sell the property. And so we've actually moved up, just upriver a little bit, and are focusing on the Springwood Reservoir project. And you may recall from a long time ago, there was a sign just past Thorpe as you're going to Seattle on I-90. It used to say Stuart Anderson Black Angus Ranch. Now it says Springwood Ranch. And we, because of this team and this unique relationships that we have and the support of everybody, we are able to purchase that Black Angus Ranch, all more than 3,600 acres of it. And then in the theme of what we do, working together, Kittitas County now owns the farmland piece down that you can see on the freeway. Yakima Nation gets property back along Tainum Creek, which was time immemorial, their ownership along that corridor between, well, actually from the mouth down to the river. There was a village site there for absolutely more than the past 20,000 years that Phil was talking about that as a trading site. That is a very important old trading village that Yakima Nation now owns. And then as we roll up the hill, there is joint ownership between State Fish and Wildlife and Yakima Nation. A lot of the areas where there's a lot of roots, medicines, food can be gathered up there. And then as you get closer to the Elk Heights exit, there's a canyon you can't see from the freeway that we're going through the feasibility process right now to look for the opportunity to store about up to 100,000 acre-feet of water at that location, use the Kittitas Reclamation District canal to fill it at that diversion up there at Easton, run it on around and put it there, build a dam, off-channel dam, and then we're looking at feasibility of a small, like 10 megawatt hydro at the outlet of that, and then all of that water in that new surface storage reservoir is going to be used to help us with spring smolt outmigration to get those fish out to the Columbia and out to the ocean and then to come back. I recently had a conversation with Senator Honeyford. He's retired now, as you all probably know, but he said, how you doing with storage? And I said, well, we got this Springwood that we're looking at, and then we have these other surface storage sites we're looking at all up and down the basin, as the commissioner said, and we have all this groundwater storage. We have more potential between groundwater and these surface storage opportunities throughout the basin in this plan in the very near future than what that big fix legislation was that we were working on in 1980 on bumping with groundwater and surface water storage. So I don't know how long that was, but I'll stop. Thanks.
No, that was great.
Well, and we don't have our American Rivers friends here, but I think it's important to remember that, again, this is more of a conservation environmentalist, minded group who sits with us when we are advocating both in Olympia and in Washington, D.C. for a dam. So as an organization, they are typically trying to take dams out, and they are advocating for a dam. And why is that? Now, it is off-channel, and Phil can probably, I think, more well speak to this, but there's support there because of the multi-benefit, because it actually is going to be used to benefit fish. It's also, Wendy should mean, you can describe how it helps you. So it's not just for fish, though, because Wendy has an obligation, BOR has an obligation for in-stream flow requirements, and this, in the end, it's still full circle, helps our irrigators because of the curtailment issues and for the power. Maybe you want to describe why, or let Phil.
No, go ahead, and then
I made a mistake not letting you go first.
So the important part that people need to understand is in the springtime when irrigation water is being pulled out of the system, that it's also the time that the juvenile fish are leaving the system. And people don't understand that. Actually, juvenile fish, people, they face stream up and they're kind of washed back, and so they're looking upstream when they're leaving. And so if you don't have the flow and they have to swim, that's an impact onto the issues that you have into there. And so going back to the science of it, having these flush flows becomes a critical time when the storm comes through, the weather hits right, and they're ready to go, that you help them go out of the system. And historically, especially in this upcoming year, a drought year, the tribe can use our time immemorial water right for in-stream flow to call on flush flows. And it does cause the old history of those things. And the SOAC will make those recommendations, and we can go on. For most of the water people in this room, they understand that. Understanding that what we're trying to do is not take away from TWWSA, but also to be able to have the benefit of the water for fish. And so I think those principles are very important into what we're talking about, because the benefit actually is for everybody. Although the fish get the water, the benefit is we're not taking from one for the other. We're actually assisting to make sure that we stay at 70%, at least 70%, per ration in the worst years. Those are guiding goals that we put as part of the guidance onto what we wanted to with the plan. And so it'll come back to me. I got some other stuff onto current projects, but also just before we do that, I do want to tell a story because Jay's here and he ought to get the benefit of this. So if you understand how the Office of Columbia River became the Office of Columbia River, Washington State passed the Columbia River bill. And one of their environmentalists, I know who he is, so I'm not going to say his name and those things. But for some reason, I'm standing with the Executive Board of Tribal Council, and we're watching this TV screen, and he's saying that someone asked him directly, well, who's speaking for the tribes? Because the environmentalists don't have a water right. And it was the best question I've ever heard a reporter say. And he said, oh, we're speaking for the tribes. And that got us furious, and that got our leadership. And Governor Gregoire sent Derek Sanderson, and Jerry O'Keefe over before the table. And it started out relatively friendly, but at the time, if you come into our old tribal council chambers, it's 14 councilmen and the general council chairman. They sit around in kind of an arrowhead. And at the point of the arrowhead, I spent a lot of my younger career there getting taught lessons, but Jay got to stand there, and it started out very, what do you think you're doing? And it just went all the way around the table. The second time through, it was the state stealing water again, the state, and it got. But the reason I bring this up, first of all, I've never seen Jay ever redder. I will say that was, and finally we got to this point, and I got up there trying to, but I remember Levina Washeen, she was the chairwoman at the time, and Tom and some other folks were with me, and she goes, Mr. Rigdon, and I go, yes. She goes, you take these, and I'm going to say it like this, you take these white men in the next room and get them to do something for us. And people don't understand that by her saying that, she gave me a narrow authority to start having the conversation. And from there, you know, it wasn't too much longer, the BlackRock thing conversation with Ron started. And so there were pieces in place. I remember, because I would always lean to Tom Ring and to Dave Fast and to Mel Sampson. I'd lean on Mel Sampson. He was a former chairman, but led our YKOP probably in a lot of ways. And the thing was we got to have something that's going to be, like she said, beneficial. But it also tells a story. You know, because after they left, we had a long conversation about not trusting anybody and all those things. And I remember saying we got to, you know, this was more after the Ron Van Gundy, and we're passing that, and you know, I pulled the old Reagan comment. We're going to have to learn how to trust but verify, and that's been an important part. That at that time our relationship was always on very thin. And our leadership was always that struggle that you have. But there's always key people. Jay Manning and Derek Sanderson were some of the key people from the state of Washington that have led us, and Tom Tebb later, but that part. Also Jerry Kelso from Bureau of Reclamation. Bureau of Reclamation did not know what to do with this whole thing when we started. Then we got Wendy, and then you see, that's the uniqueness. There was this place that brought this unique place into the different, and where the irrigators and the tribe were not always on the same page, but we're having the conversation to get to the place where we are now. And I do think that's important to recognize. You know, all the folks that sit there. You see Jeff over here, said, you know, in the work group but he was part of the SOAC group that dealt with that in-stream flow water right, that understood how challenging those conversations always were with everybody. And so as you have that's that part of that history. But where do we go from into tomorrow, I think, is where you can have a Springwood, that we, the tribe, co-own land with Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, and 50 years ago, who would have thunk that? I mean, that in its own thing is amazing, but also the co-management of that to meet the needs of our people, but also to the citizens of the state to make sure that opportunities are there for both of us to work with that. That's huge. And so I want to talk a little bit of the Lower River at some point, but I'll pass it on so other folks.
Yep. Go ahead.
Just really shortly, what you're hearing Phil describe is really our strength, which is us, our relationships, and coming from such diverse, different positions we're representing, and our ability to, through trust, respect, friendship, and really caring about each other, helps us get to the point where we can ride through any wave, we can accomplish anything, because people can be really strong working together, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. I do want to ask Melissa this question, because it's really a massive accomplishment. I work on the indigenous rights side of treaty rights litigation opposite the state often. So for this panel to say that they've built trust between tribes and the state to co-steward and co-manage different land, that is a massive accomplishment. And it speaks to the state's involvement on building a future and trying to, these 7 elements, trying to, as the state, facilitate doing its obligations to the municipalities, to the different districts. So what is the state's role on this? We've listened to how there's been federal legislation, state legislation. So what is the state's story about YBIP and where it's at right now?
And the partnership, and I said this in my history lesson in the first half, is a very important component. And you've heard some of these folks talk about the partnership piece. The state legislation to implement the integrated plan passed in 2013, and we've had a very generous legislative financial contributions since then. In 2013, I think we got $30 million, and this most recent budget cycle, we got close to $50 million. So you start adding all that up, and the state has contributed over $300 million over the past decade to implementing all 7 elements. And that is another important component, is moving all 7 elements forward simultaneously. So those investments are going into projects that achieve goals in all 7 elements, whether we are partnering with the federal government on technology as it's associated with fish passage, for example, or partnering with the tribe to understand fish movement in the basin, partnering with Central Washington University to understand where's the most feasible place to put groundwater storage, given the geology in the basin, or partnering with the counties and the cities on municipal components and how can we improve reliability for the citizens, and partnering with the irrigation districts and the farmers to deliver water better through conservation measures. A lot of the photos that you're seeing behind us, like rotate, highlight all 7 elements, and that was on purpose. We wanted you to see the pieces of the puzzle. So the state of Washington is really invested in, again, all 7 elements, but overall to achieve that ecosystem restoration, the natural resource function, the economics, and then, the water supply reliability into the future. We haven't talked a lot about the cost overall, and I just highlighted the state investment. This plan is going to cost over $4 billion with a B. To implement over the next 30 to 40 years, and we're 10 years-ish into that implementation. So building that partnership, investing in the science and technology, looking at those long-term goals are very important.
One second, Robert. I want to stick to, you highlighted the state investment, and I believe, what was the number that you shared for the state investment?
I should have looked it up this morning. I don't have the number at my fingertips, but I'll say over $300 million.
Over $300 million. And I know there's the federal contribution to this overall project. And what's the federal contribution?
So
Wendy?
Yeah, Melissa, you don't know that? About 400 million is what we've estimated. So that's about 2009.
Okay.
So, yeah.
These numbers sound, they're accomplished through the advocacy of all these stakeholders coming together, utilizing the science, that 7-foot stack of documents, and alignment, right? You think about the climate that we're in today, to get anything through the federal legislature or the state legislature. So the work that they're doing is so tangible and important to our basin. And we are the beneficiaries of a lot of this work. So I just wanted to highlight those numbers, because those numbers, especially in a day like today, they're not just handing out that type of resource to fund this type of balancing of different interests. Pivoting, Urban?
I just was going to touch on the money piece. Also, in addition to that, there's the state funding that Melissa mentioned, and as that comes in, we are taking the opportunity to use that as local matches to request funding from other sources. So oftentimes, pieces of that money that Melissa was mentioning is being used as a 25% local match that then we're able to bring in other funding sources with a 75% level. So it really gets, it's a lot more than it seems because of our ability to use the state money as local match to a 75% grant match on other funding sources.
And quickly, how much money do you think any singular organization would get if we went to Olympia in Washington, D.C. and said, just give it to me just for my reason, not to these other people?
So, and I would just want to add this. These numbers are kind of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, but the tribe brings a lot of other resources through our settlements with BPA on the responsibility. And so there's other things that come into addition to that I don't think we've always done a clearer thing of saying what those dollars amounts. The tribe actually doesn't want to keep track of the state or whoever, because we believe the federal government has a trust responsibility to help us meet some of these goals, and we push on that pretty hard, and Wendy knows that quite well as well as. But on the same note, though, there's one thing about how much funding you get, but what you actually deliver on the ground, and I think that's, you know, when you see with that, you have the helix and the juvenile fish passage at Clem, and there's one point I think is they did some testing last year just to open up the gates to see if it'll work, and you know, 50,000 juvenile fish left the system because of it. And it's just a couple days. It wasn't even a full, you know. And to me, that was and I got a picture on my phone that shows the first one. And to us, I remember I was giving a PowerPoint presentation at some presentation over in at Muxut, and I remember looking at that, and it made me think of Mel Sampson. You know, many of these elders that have actually gone on, but their inspiration was to someday see this type of thing. And so, to me, it has a deep meaning onto achieving those things. But the other thing is you look at the conservation done on the ground, you look at the work that we are accomplishing. It is because it's a partnership. But also, we're driven to make sure that we can go back and say we delivered. And we're doing that. There's some that we storage, you know, goes and it falls apart here, but we're going to find that solution. You know, the 3-foot pool raise at Cleom, I give Wendy a bad time all the time about that.
So close.
And we're this close from actually being able to use that water, and to me, those are the great things, and so I think that's an important part of the story. But to see, and this started with Jay, but it was passed on to the other ecology directors and the state of, they made sure it was a priority that we live up to that obligation. And I give the state, Melissa especially, because she you know, she kept Tom Tebb and Derek and hopefully Larry upcoming, you know, like here we go, and that's the great part of this is you got a great bunch of folks really dedicated to finding how we get this, and I'm proud of my team. From our biologists, our hydrologists, and our folks, our engineering department, and we've implemented a ton of things, you know, on the res and off, and the habitat work, and those things. When Chanaway was purchased, one of our first habitat projects was putting trees in the creeks up there, and to me, it's those things that give us that place that we can go and show people we're delivering. And so it's not wasted money. It's having impacts that I think are enormous into that message too. So thanks.
Thank you. We will pivot to the impact after this question with Sean. Sean, as a farmer, the agriculture industry is our largest industry here in the Yakima Basin. With YBIP coming together and being in this phase 3 and having this vision, how has your industry, the ag industry, viewed YBIP, and how is it working with YBIP potentially to accomplish some of the goals the industry has?
That's a great question. So I think it's important to understand the context of the tree fruit industry right now to sort of understand where things are at. And these last several years have been very difficult for farmers, and also demographically, lots of independent farmers have been retiring or aging out, and meanwhile there's been an influx of outside capital to the industry. So how does our industry view anything right
right now is really in flux. So there's new faces, there's new influences on our industry. And I'd say one of the phenomenons that I think is important to view is more of that outside money is getting invested into the Columbia Basin and into other areas where the water is perceived to be more secure. Versus in the Yakima Basin where it's perceived to be more fragile because of the frequency of droughts. So one way you can view that is with the prices of open ground. If you were to buy an acre of ground in a junior water rights district, what would that be worth? Well, maybe $8,000 to $10,000 an acre. In a senior rights district in the Yakima Basin, maybe $12,000 an acre. In the Columbia Basin in Quincy right now, you might have to pay $20,000 an acre for the exact same dirt that grows the exact same apples, but one key difference, and that's security of water. So I think it's really important to view. Farmers look at ground out there as I'm growing the same apples. I'm looking, it should be the same, but where the flow of money is really away from this industry. And I'd say, as somebody who's really invested in Yakima, that's a troubling trend. It's a problem. And I feel like the YBIP project is absolutely necessary. We've tried to do the one-off projects that solve one problem at a time, and those have shown not to work. Cooperating, we have found some common ground. We've found some solutions. We've found funding. Those are really good things. But I'd say, as it's perceived by the tree fruit community in Yakima, is it too late already? I don't think so. But the momentum needs to keep going. And so we're in this period right now where we're facing another year of drought, and where we had to, lay more ground fallow so that we could irrigate the best orchards that we have and abandon the ones that we don't. We've had to make tough decisions like that already. We're going to have to do that again here. So it's something that we applaud. We want to be a part of. We want to support it, but also we want to make sure that it does hit deadlines and it sees progress that's tangible that we can act on, and we can basically we just need the most reliable water supply that we can have.
Are farmers engaging with YBIP on potential projects and solutions to the water scarcity issue that you're alluding to?
Our irrigation districts represent us, and our irrigation districts are generally made up of boards of farmers and that have professional staff and clear direction from those boards, but. It's not one farmer at a time as much as those districts engaging, and there's very active, especially with the Rosa, very active involvement there, but also Yakima Tieton and other ones.
Also, farms represent a clear path to small storage on site, surface water storage, and so that is part of our expanding conceptually. How do we use the infrastructure itself to actually help feed the infrastructure? So absolutely, the farms themselves physically provide opportunities for surface water storage.
Let's build on that. Let's talk about the impacts and potential solutions in these 7, and let's just take them in turn. But since we started with water storage and potential surface water storage impact or ideas, are there any projects either being developed or already that have been developed related to, in particular, this surface water storage that you're talking about?
Yep, I already touched on the Springwood one. We that's in this initial phase. Phil had touched a little bit on the Toppenish Fan. There's a lot of water that's going to be able to, and is being stored out in different places out on the reservation. We're looking at some opportunities to use the Rosa system to get water out over on the other side of the river, get that into the ground. There are plenty of opportunities there. There are some other surface storage sites out on the Yakima Reservation that are really promising. And there's more groundwater storage up above. I think just going through the list that I'm thinking of here that's actually achievable within the next decade is probably about 400, a little over 400,000 acre feet between surface and ground that we can accomplish. So yeah, we're working on storage, but you have to be able to fill that storage. You just can't build storage and then not have the ability to fill it. And one of the things that we're doing is when we're talking about these 7 elements, we really can't talk about them individually, because you build surface storage or you have a place for groundwater storage, you got to fill it with something. So that's where our conservation element comes in, where we have already saved, I think, already 65,000 acre feet, I think, of water through this plan on water conservation. We're moving forward, and as we do more canal piping, canal lining, then, and I remember getting a question from a congressman in about 1993 in DC, and he said, well, so you got this conservation bill you're talking about, but is that going to work? And I said, no, it's not going to work. We can have conservation, but you have to have some place to put that water. You have to put it in storage. So that's where the conservation element fits in to the groundwater and surface storage element, which then fits into the water marketing element. But then as we're working on surface storage, then that flow is providing fish passage, which then fits into the fish passage element, and then the habitat improvement element. And you can't do any of this without the structural and operational elements. So each element is made stronger by the other elements. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's define this this 7th element here that you just brought up about this market reallocation, which is creating conditions and removing barriers to all efficient water rights trading between willing parties to improve water supplies and stream flow conditions. What is this market reallocation?
If I could just quickly start on that, it is, there's all kinds of possibilities with that, but I'll just use the one example. Phil had mentioned it about in that 2015 drought, and we came up with this plan. Well, actually, it was even before that. It was a couple years before that when we came up with the first on-the-ground construction project of the integrated plan, which was a pipeline in the Kittitas Reclamation District system out by Menashtash. And Phil was there, I was there, we had a little team there, and we were talking to the Assistant Secretary of Water and Science at the Interior Building on Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C., and I was all excited talking about, well, we can put in this pipeline, we'll have more water, we'll just put it into Menashtash Creek, and we'll help water this thing up. It's been dry for a century, for about 4 months out of the year. There's no fish passage going up into there. Phil supported me, the rest of the team did. We got, with help of Ecology, the Yakima Nation, the other state agencies, federal agencies, Reclamation, everybody, we put in this pipeline, and we got the funding for that. We put that water into the creek, and then as with other projects, we now have opened up 28 miles of fish habitat up in the Menashtash north and south branches that had been blocked for a century. That is a form of water marketing, which is accept money to put in a pipeline in exchange for putting water in the place that provides an ecosystem service. That's marketing. But there are other types, which is actually purchasing or leasing. Phil.
Melissa, I'll let Melissa go first then.
I was just going to provide another example of water marketing. Think of an instance where a farmer is fallowing a piece of ground for one reason or another for a year. Maybe that you can move that water that would have otherwise been used for irrigation on that specific piece of property, move it around to another irrigation district. And so we actually saw this a fair bit in 2024. It was drought conditions, and Rosa Irrigation District in particular was looking at those opportunities and leased water from other irrigation districts so that it would boost their water supply.
And specifically because this is actually very critical for municipal. So presently we are working on and have our application in for setting up our water bank with the State Department of Ecology as the county. As a result of situations being the way they were, there was the utility that was created, and that was a way to mitigate for use, and it has to do with obviously exempt wells. But again, this really speaks to the heart of how everything is related. We need to be able to permit people to be able to build, and they have to have water to do so. And there are areas where we know that are closed. And so the solution for Yakima County very clearly is, how can we pursue acquiring water rights so that we can create an entire county where people are able to follow their American dream, do what they would like to do, buy a piece of property. We had a lot of people who bought homes here or land with the idea that they were going to retire here, and then they found out that, well, this is a place that has a little bit of a water issue. So putting forward the water bank is a way for us as a municipality to be able to move water around, acquire it from different users, change beneficial use, mitigate, and do the things that we can represent well to all of our stakeholders that are responsibly using the water, and we are abiding by all water law to be able to still have people do what they would like to do with their property.
And I do want to, I do think it's an important, a lot of these pieces have been in place for quite a while. There's the Water Transfer Working Group, and that does a lot of the evaluation to make sure that it's actually going to be fallow and that water has actually been in use. And so there's a lot of science, I guess, that goes into making sure, and the people sitting at the table make sure that now, you know, especially where the first big problem started up in Kittitas, and Kittitas developed a water bank to address the domestic use and those things. And I think that's been an important part of the story, is understanding that. But water transfer working groups have been a part of the basin for a very long time into water being transferred.
Flowing naturally, we have this list of questions. What I'm going to do is, we won't be able to get through all of them, but I'll take it on to type these out and just send them to this working group, which meets quarterly, and they will get your questions. And, you know, so if we don't get to them today, just know I will hand them off so that this group continues to work through the issues that are important to all of you. You guys are already hitting on one of these questions, and that is what is being done to institute a basin-wide water trading market. So we're on that. But just generally speaking, for someone just sitting out there who has a piece of land, who has no water rights to it, and they hear about a water bank, is there a just layman's way of saying how they could access these water banks?
You want to come to Yakima County's Public Services Department, and we offer early assistance, which is a way of saying that if you have an idea conceptually what you'd like to do with your property, or you're thinking of acquiring a piece of property, but obviously you'd like to know whether or not you could do the thing you want to do if you were to buy the property, we will go through and sit down with you, and among various aspects, we will discuss water, and we will advise you as to whether or not this is something that you can do. And if it isn't readily available, we'll advise you on how to do it. And then when we get our water bank set up, obviously the idea is to provide a solution for you able to do what you would like to do.
Phil mentioned Kittitas County was early on in that, so the same thing could occur in Kittitas County. You'd go to Kittitas County Public Works and talk to them about it, and they would work you through it, and Ecology's got one too.
I was actually going to give a shout out to Trout Unlimited, who's in the room today as well, and they do water right acquisition work and water banking work as well.
Thank you. There's a lot of funds that have been obtained through legislation and collaborated efforts to obtain these funds. Are there any concerns for this group that the funds may be impacted by a change in recent executive orders, or in the shift of policy-based interests that are always evolving?
I'll start with, I'm going to completely stay out of current political affairs, but Phil and Commissioner McKinney, Larry Madsen, and I just spent a week working the White House and the Hill, and there isn't anybody that is doing what we're doing. We're really unique, and what we're doing appears to us to be supported, and we will, whatever happens, this is a place in time we still, some of our projects are still going just fine. Our conservation projects are going, but there are some that are a little slower coming out, but we're just going to let the dust settle and we'll continue on with our long-term plan. Phil?
Like Urban, I don't want to get too far down the weeds, but I think an important thing is that when we go, this is not partisan. Water is for all of us. And Democrats and Republicans both like to fish as much as Indians, so let's be very, very clear on that. More than anything, though, you know, of course we're worried because we've turned our attention to the lower river, looking at the Lowhead dams, looking at opportunities. You have a stargrass problem that is created through some historical things. Really, you know, with all the layers and layers of things going on, you know, you talk about ESA and those kind of things. We now got the things that we're heading to help us not be driven by ESA, but driven by, you know, abundance and harvestable number of fish. That's what the tribe, we don't want to hit some target for ESA. We want to hit a target for Parker Dam. So if you, and at least Yellow Wash will laugh at me.
So Junior, I think what really, it's not just the science, it's common sense.
Yeah.
Everything that we bring forward is common sense, and it's easy for anyone in their role when we come marching in. And I think, again, it's worth restating that if you are a legislator and you have the ability to appropriate funds, are you going to appropriate funds to a group of people who come in and said that we have a solution that we all agree on? Or everyone individually coming in and saying, I have the one good idea, it's only mine that's going to work, and those other ones have terrible ideas, don't fund them. Of course they're going to go with a group of people who are saying that they have provided solutions, not just a problem. We show you we have a problem and we have solutions. But again, it's rooted in science, but more importantly, I think sometimes even than that is common sense.
I appreciate the responses and just the reality, right? That collaboration takes you farther. It doesn't matter what wave of time we're in or not. It's water is for everybody. Let's come local and let's talk about the county or city, different local governments, what we're doing about the water scarcity, and are there any plans or already county codes that look to protect water usage, or for example, maybe have days out of the summer where, you know, irrigating your lawn is, you know, the water will be turned off. Is there anything locally that's being done?
We are not considering telling people when they can irrigate. But this is actually a really good example of how we have limited authority, for which I'm grateful. We are land use. And that really the involvement of the county to be involved in water is really something that has only happened in the last probably 10 or 15 years, when all of a sudden there was a court decision that said that we needed to be involved in affirming that water was legally and readily available, because traditionally we are just land use. So that is kind of, and mind you, I think the State Department of Ecology wasn't really agreeing with that decision, and even Yakima County had a little bit of a whiplash with it, because we would really like to not get drawn into water wars. But here we are. Yeah. I would say the water bank, again, is something that has been a passion project of mine to see through, so that is a solution. But some of you will know that where your water comes from, many of you probably irrigate your lawns. You might have city water, but you have irrigation coming to your home for your lawn. When YTID experienced significant disruption to services due to the Retreat fire, we all felt a little pinch, did we? My hydrangeas didn't look very good. But then when you talk about what Sean had to go through and think about not watering trees that bear fruit in our entire economy for weeks at a time, those are big losses. So I think the reality, more than anything, will have us mitigating. But there is no ordinance right now that we would look at trying to curtail water use. And essentially, when you're an when you're in Yakima County, it isn't, the city has a utility and they might have the ability to curtail in some way. But when you have an exempt well, we have a certain amount of water that your exempt well, you're permitted to use. So if you wanted to use that and conserve it, that's up to you. But we aren't able to say for some reason you can't have access to that water. It's a legal right.
Thank you.
I would just like to, on the local level especially, there's a lot of state, people who got, from Hearst to, you can go down the list. The thing is that we're going to be looking at 48% proration this year. That means that if you don't have a 1905 right, or even if you do have the 1905, you only get 48%. So that part. So, back a long time ago, some people some houses were told you can't turn on your water because, and those things are important business and to what we talk about. The tribe, the irrigators, us, we actually joined forces to say, you may think that you have a right to water underneath in the ground underneath your house, but you don't. That water is connected to the water rights in the basin, and we don't want to go down the legal route, but there will be people that have water banks that want to, and understanding those parts of what you're doing and those kind of things. I think it's important that we create the opportunity for the local use that Amanda's talking about, but also that we find solutions to the storage or to the other opportunities to recharge these aquifers, to do the things so that we aren't caught off into some place that we shouldn't be. So.
Chair, this is important. So one more piece on this topic. We do have a municipal subcommittee that is working. So it's co-chaired by Arden Thomas from Kittitas County, Dave Brown, former water management or the city of Yakima, and it's working on providing opportunities, working with Benton County, Yakima County, Kittitas County municipalities to do zero-escape and different things like that. In addition to that, on this municipal issue, and what Phil mentioned was some municipalities, people being out of order or after that, May 10th, 1905 date, we actually, as part of this plan, when we put it together on storage, we allocated in our plans 50,000 acre feet of storage that we are all collectively working on coming up with through water marketing and however we do it to meet the municipal and industrial needs, both the water that is already being used, but then water for growth. So locally, each community is going to be benefiting from this. And again, this is a voluntary program, so like Commissioner McKinney said, we're not legislating that people do things. We're providing opportunities that people can have a more secure water supply, get themselves in order, and do it through this process. Thanks.
Thank you. So this question, I think, is tailored to the farm industry, the ag industry, and that's, has the water scarcity impacted the scalability of your businesses, and have you seen your operation start to shrink or get smaller?
That's it's a tough one to measure, but I would say it's absolutely impacted the farming decisions we've made, and in cases like where we're in the Wapato district, we've intentionally rotated ground out to be fallow so that if there's another drought that we have some acreage that's not requiring full water supply. There's a number of cases where we've tried switching over to other commodities, and so a simple rule that I've learned is apples require about 3 acre-feet a year, cherries require about 2 acre-feet a year, and grapes require about 1 acre-foot a year. So we got into the grape business, and so but that unfortunately there's a scalability challenge in the wine grape industry that there's not quite the advantages that apples have in growing distinctive. We can grow distinctive apples all day long, but wine grapes are there's California's the behemoth in that industry. So there's a cap on the ability to switch commodities, but we've looked into that kind of stuff.
They grow more, but ours tastes better.
That's right.
We need to wrap up here, but we received several questions related to recharging of aquifers and what is being done for both deep and the shallow aquifers to recharge them. And if there's a specific project or success tied to that, that's the question.
I feel like I'm the mic hog here.
That's rare.
No.
I know. I know.
It looks good on you.
Yeah, thanks. So City of Yakima, great example. It has for a number of years been, when the water's available, the wells are scattered around town here. And so there are some where the water is actually, you think it's coming out, it's not. There's somewhere it's actually going in. And then there's a whole process, permitting process and everything that makes all that work. City of Yakima Water is putting water in the ground, and then they're calculating how much water that is, and then what the impacts would be as you get to Union Gap, because everything goes out Union Gap. And there is actually a block of water that is being built up in the ground as a result of that. There are other municipalities in the Yakima Basin that are working on that type of aquifer storage and recovery for municipalities. And it's expensive to do it that way, the way that you have to have it tested and everything to get that water into the ground. So that's occurring. There's also the volitional water storage that Phil was talking about that is in a very large area like the Toppenish Fan that we mentioned. And in addition to that, there are some opportunities in the more localized alluvial fan. Central Washington University scientists are here, and they're working on some studies looking at Menashtash and in some other areas as well, where you can spread water out in the stream in the area of that alluvial fan. So the creek comes out of the mountain, spreads out in the fan before it gets to the river. And we're finding ways where it's not already occurring to spread that water out on the ground, get those molecules soaked down into the soil, into the ground, and to slow those molecules down as they work their way back down. It acts as water storage in multiple places, and it also cools the temperature so that water goes back into the stream and then gets in the river. And when you're in July and August, you get a lot of cool water that comes in a little warmer, and then it comes out cool and then helps sustain things. There's a whole bunch of things we're doing, both shallow and deep.
Phil?
And I think there's important places that we continue to look. When you go to like Wapto, and using that as an example, you see a huge change in the water table moving by the foot. And as we do conservation on the irrigation project, and you start having that, you could be having that drop, and then it'll be looking at where will be the opportunity for us to bring that through other recharge opportunities when it's less impactful to TWSA or to those kind of things. And so that's part of our goal through some of this. Groundwater storage actually, I'm hoping the benefit will be into the long term, and because you have a lot less infrastructure to maintain, but also I think there's benefits that we don't see totally yet onto what those things could be. So.
All right, a few housekeeping issues as we wrap up. First, I ask you kindly to grab a survey and fill a survey out when you exit. I also want to invite everyone up to the Centennial Room up on the first floor, where we will be serving lunch, and we hope to see all of you there. And the museum is open, so all of you have free admission to move about the museum. Most of you are members, so that's why you laugh. And as we close, I want to say thank you to our panelists. I want to say thank you to Yellow Wash, our elder here. And I want to say thank you to all of you, because at the end of the day, everybody in this room plays a part in how water works for all of us in the future. So thank you very much, and hopefully you'll come to the next one.